The rumors of Poison Spark's demise are greatly exaggerated. Now, I can't speak to comparisons on Occultist between this league and last, because I decided to play it on the newly revamped Pathfinder, which for me has been an excellent choice. But what I can say is, Poison Spark looked amazing. It was a well-rounded build that had a little bit of everything. Great damage, pretty solid defenses, and enough speed that you're definitely not going to notice, plus the ability to flex between mapping, bossing, or whatever other content you want. In other words, a build that was very up my alley, especially since there's an innate mechanical complexity to actually building the character, something that I always find personally interesting. But it also got several nerfs, going from 320 to 321. And the question was, should you still play it? Well, I did end up dropping Nimbus, because honestly, I couldn't tell the difference. But aside of that, most of my choices aren't that different from the version that Tuna played last league. So let's start off with the key mechanics that I'm leveraging. First up, if you're a Pathfinder, you need to pay attention to flask uptime. And I don't have completely perfect uptime for bossing in this setup. There are very slight gaps in both my Progenesis and my Quicksilver flask, with larger gaps in my life flask if I was trying to spam it. However, functionally, my flasks don't fall off, and I don't need to spam my life flask, so that's totally fine. To achieve this, you'll need a combination of reduced flask charges used, which is especially helpful as a flask implicit, increased flask duration, increased flask charges gained, and possibly some flask clusters for things like increased effective flasks on you, more charge gain, duration, or whatever else you happen to be able to get. Honestly, I'm not sure about any numbers here, I just went off what POB said, and when it said average of 100%, I was good. The two flasks that you absolutely must have up are the Taste of Hate and Topaz Flask. These are needed to cap your resistances, which also means we need very little cold or lightning res on gear. If you wanted to ignore even more resistances, you could sacrifice one other flask suffix for elemental resistance and pretty much replace all of your res, but personally I didn't find that to be super necessary. So instead, I opted for cast speed for more damage. For my other flask suffix, I ended up going with reduced mana cost. That way I didn't need as much ES sustain to sit at full ES the entire time. With Leech, arguably this isn't strictly mandatory, but it makes the build feel better, so I'm definitely going to put it in. Also, I have a life flask with very high rates of recovery, because I'm of course a master surgeon, which means my life flask does not fall off when I reach full life, so I wanted to recover as much as possible over its total duration. Next up, this build doesn't have any armor, but still ends up being reasonably tanky against physical damage. Massive hits, like something from an Uber Boss Slam, can still kill you, unless you use Immortal Call manually to defend against it. But most other types of fizz damage are shrugged off easily. 40% of fizz taken as comes from my Cloak of Flame, and roughly another 20% from the Taste of Hate, since I have quite a bit of flask effect. Arctic Armor further reduces the remaining fizz taken, at least when I'm standing still, and if I was ever in a situation where I needed more Fizzmit, I could always swap in a Granite Flask and or change to Determination. After all, for bosses, the Quicksilver Flask isn't really needed with how fast this build already is. But defenses are good and all. How do we do damage? For Spark to Poison, it needs to deal chaos damage. Therefore, the build combines a 20 quality Phantasmal Spark with Ashes of the Stars, granting 30% quality to skill gems. This converts 100% of Spark's lightning damage to chaos. Looking for good alt quality gems elsewhere in the build is definitely a good idea, as those are also going to be enhanced by your ashes. Something else that's important for Spark to both feel good and deal damage effectively is a combination of Pierce and Projectile Speed. Generally speaking, the higher the better. Piercing shots grants 3 pierces and 15% more proj speed. Ballistics is 20% proj speed, combining multiplicatively, not additively. Then the rest is from Anomalous Blood and Sand, bolstered by Ashes of the Stars and level 4 Enhance. If you want even more, get it via a Crucible Tree or alternatively on some Cluster Gems. But personally, this is where it started to feel really good to me and where I couldn't notice a difference if I added some or removed a little bit. I also ended up using Blood Notch with Immutable Force for insane life recovery. I have my stun threshold based off 60% of my energy shield, meaning almost every hit will stun me. Immutable Force shortens the duration of the stuns to the point where I basically never notice them, and Blood Notch recovers up to 60% of the damage from the stunning hit. When combined with a Leech Mastery for instant leech, some ES Leech on the tree, and Life Leech via a Vitality Watcher's Eye, the build recovery is incredible. For more on this, check out my Immortal Pathfinder video. Thus far, I've done a lot of delving, mapping, and even a few uber bosses. It doesn't feel like there's anything the build can't do, though it definitely excels in enclosed areas due to the way sparks bounce off of walls. Map-wise, I've been running Legion, Harvest, Expedition, and Harbinger. Several notoriously dangerous mechanics, all of which the build handled without issue even when I clicked stupid altars. Delve-wise, I've gone down to about 300 depth and killed multiple bosses. Uber-wise, I did Uber Shaper, Uber Eater, and Uber Elder, because I had those lying around. Then I got bored of that and went back to mapping and delving, because honestly, I don't really care about Uber bosses. But with that said, let's take a look at my gear so you can see a little bit more about how I'm doing the things I am. So, first off, my weapon. +1 to level of all spell skill gems, flat lightning to spells, fractured chaos.multi, then cast speed arcane surge plus lightning damage. There's several bases that you can use, one of them being lightning to spells and attacks, another being a good old scepter for 40% increased elemental damage, and if you're feeling really spicy, you could also go with a profane wand, though it will be a little harder to meet the intelligence requirements for something like that. From there, you want things like lightning or all spell skills, lightning to spells, lightning damage, dot multi, cast speed, proj speed, or a couple other even more niche stats. And you definitely want elemental overload somewhere. This can be gained either via your crucible tree or by using an oscillating scepter, which is found from Heist. I ended up grabbing some lightning damage and then poison duration, but chaos.multi or more cast speed are also really good options, and if you want some utility, you can always grab proj speed. The reduced projectile damage here affects the hit and not the dot, so there's no downside. Then for my helmet, I'm using Devouring Diadem, because I wanted to use an extra aura, and I didn't want to deal with mana costs. I could just hard allocate EB, but that wouldn't let me use an extra aura, and whenever I tried to rework things to use a rare helmet, it just didn't feel quite as good. I do think ultimately, at some point, a rare helmet's better if you're going to keep min-maxing, but for the stage I'm at, Diadem is super easy, and you want Spark Fire's 3 projectiles or Spark Fire's projectiles in a Nova. Then for my shield, I'm using Atziri's Reflection. First off, increased effect of your curses is a massive damage multiplier. This is because you're using both Temp Chains and Despair, though more about that in a little bit. Also, 53 intelligence lets me use my wand. In general, the build's pretty int-starved, so it's feeling pretty good. And using a shield is really nice because you can get some life and a 100% chance to avoid being shocked, which makes you immune to all ailments when you equip the Storm Shroud Jewel. Like I mentioned at the top of the video, Ashes of the Stars is absolutely required for the build. You can get increased reservation efficiency of skills and quality of all skill gems. It should be noted that while I have a 2120 Phantasmal Spark, if you want to save some money, go with a 2023 and get a 27% Ashes. Last I checked, the difference between the Ashes I have and the Ashes that you can buy with 27 quality is about 10 Divines. Or, you can buy a bottom tier shiny one and then get lucky with a couple Divines, and here you go. Steeped in the Profane is, of course, Curse Effect, which is more damage, but you could always go with a Defensive Anoint instead. Speaking of defenses, I'm using Cloak of Flame to shift Fizz damage over to fire. It also gives fire res, and I have Socketed Gems plus Socketed Projectile Gems. You could also go with generic increased damage or Socketed Duration Gems. There's quite a lot of options. You could even do reduced extra damage taken from crits, though crits haven't really been a big issue since I have a decent amount of evasion. Then for my gloves, I'm using Asenath's Gentle Touch, corrupted with Cast Speed and Despair. Don't get this unless you actively hate having money. The Cast Speed is, in particular, quite a lot of expense, whereas just a regular old Despair will only cost you 3 to 4 Divines. Then for my rings, I picked this one up pretty cheap. I think it was 1, maybe 2 Divines, and crafted minus mana cost. Recoup's good since it gives reliable recovery, Cast Speed is damage, and I needed to cap my Chaos Res. For the other, I essence crafted it using a method that I went over in my Righteous Fire crafting video. Plus, I did Suffixes Can't Be Changed via a Wild Bristle Matron, Veiled Chaos, to get 57 life as a prefix. I needed strength and wanted dot multi, so this wasn't too hard to hit. For my Stygian, I honestly can't remember if I purchased this or crafted it. Either way, I've done multiple videos talking about how to craft Stygians. You want life, and then either flask charges gained, reduced flask charges used, or increased flask effect duration, and hopefully some life and res to go with that. You need the flask mods because otherwise your flasks won't have 100% uptime. Then I happened to stick whatever eye jewel I could fit in, with things like life, res, lightning damage to spells, damage over time while holding a shield, and corrupted blood can't be inflicted on you. This was a horrifyingly underpriced item because it also has reservation efficiency, though I don't think I'm actually using it in the current setup, so don't feel obligated to get it. Yeah, it's doing nothing at all. It just happens to be really, really shiny, so I didn't bother to replace it. Then, last but not least, my boots. These are, of course, Essence crafted with Essence of Envy. Spell suppression base. If you want to know more about how I made them, take a look at my recent crafting livestream where I go over all this sort of stuff. For flasks, Progenesis is a huge amount of a build's defenses. Try to get one with a high reduced charges used and high increased duration roll. Remember, the 25% of life loss prevention is scaled by flask effect, which you have quite a lot of on a Pathfinder, even for unique flasks. Having high uptime is also important. Then I'm capping my lightning res using this. The cast speed could be something else, such as evasion or armor. Taste of Hate shifts damage taken away from Fizz. And of course, it caps my cold res. Then I have a Quicksilver to go fast and reduce mana costs, plus a life flask with a massive amount of recovery and immunity to poison if used while poisoned. Though, to be fair, you can kinda just tank the poison damage due to the build's massive recovery. Moving on, let's take a look at the tree here. First up, Master Toxicist, Nature's Reprisal, Nature's Adrenaline, and Master Surgeon. This is a massive amount of damage, so you always take it, at least if you're a Poison Pathfinder. This is Poison Prolific Clear, plus a chance for 100% more damage, aka 20% more damage. Then Nature's Adrenaline helps with permanent flasks. Master Surgeon makes life flasks feel great. Though technically this isn't strictly required, I do like it, I'm definitely keeping it, but if you wanted to use something like Nature's Boon, you absolutely could. Then, looking at the jewels I have, we've got an Impossible Escape going up to Chaos Inoculation. There's a lot of really good notables here. Whispers of Doom, Atrophy, Serpentine Spellslinger, and Influence, with a lot of really bad travel nodes to them, like Effective Non-Curse Auras that I don't need, like Chance to Poison on Spell Hit, which I don't need, and like these nodes for the curses that I'm not casting or reserving. It should be noted, if you wanted to pick up EB, the way to do that is drop the curse effect here and here, pick it up, and drop the diadem. Though you will probably need to upgrade from an Enlighten 3 to an Enlighten 4 if you end up doing that, maybe even an Enlighten 5, I honestly haven't done the math. Then coming over here, Storm Shroud, this gives me ailment immunity, just a rare jewel, things like dot multi, chaos dot multi, life, damage with poison, ailments deal damage faster, poison on hit, all good stats to have. Got the Blood Notch plus Immutable Force combo, this helps the build's recovery feel absolutely excellent. Now, cluster jewel-wise, I went with 2 Chaos clusters, and then 2 Flask clusters, and 2 Chaos dot clusters. You could also go with Proj clusters, or a couple of other options. This just happened to be what felt the best to me. And finally, coming over here, we've got another rare jewel. This caps my poison chance exactly at 100%. And finally, the Watcher's Eye right here. Damage over time multiplier is important. Damage leached as life while affected by vitality is important. The reduced reflect is not important because you can't take reflected damage since you only deal chaos, and chaos damage doesn't reflect. And if you don't believe me about the chaos, well, I have Awakened Void Manip, so even if I have extra fire or cold added randomly somewhere, it's just going to get completely deleted. Speaking of, what are some important alt qualities? Blood and Sand needs to be anomalous to give you Proj speed. Spark needs to be phantasmal for the lightning converted to chaos. Herald of Agony needs to be divergent for the additional poison chance. 50% chance to poison on hit means you basically don't need to get it elsewhere. And finally, I like alt quality Arctic Armor. You can either go with Anomalous for a chance to freeze enemies when hit, or Divergent, which I think I'm going to swap to for just a few more defenses. Now, like I mentioned before, I made the boots using a method that I showcased in my recent livestream. Video will be up in the card and down in the description. I made the Corpse Spiral using a method from my RF crafting video, and I'm going to go over how I made the weapon in an upcoming video. Be sure to get subscribed so you don't miss out on that. Now, the easiest way to find an up-to-date POB is joining my Discord, reacting to give yourself the notification and community roles, then grabbing it from the Build Link archive channel. Or you can always pause the video right now and copy the link down. But if you paid attention to my previous Immortal Pathfinder video, you might notice something's missing from everything I just talked about. Petrified Blood. You might also notice that my health is much less spiky than it was. Petrified Blood made me tankier against massive single hits, but I swapped it out for Arctic Armor. First off, I felt I was tanky enough even with the Arctic Armor. And second of all, I didn't want to spam my life flask constantly. The reason my health was so spiky before is the top half of my life, roughly 1/3 of my total health pool, could only be healed by my life flask, whereas the lower half was healed by Recoup, Blood Notch, and Leech. This led to the build looking squishier than it actually was. I'd quickly get knocked to half, but rarely lose anything beyond that. However, I still felt obligated to life flask back to full. Now, I only hit my flask from time to time when I'm taking massive damage, which feels much better overall. And so long as I stand still before big hits, I feel like I have enough mitigation for everything but uber boss slams. If this damage feels like an issue, you could easily swap out Grace for Determination and focus a little bit more on getting armor by dropping your Quicksilver for bosses. So overall, Poison Spark Pathfinder has been a great, well-rounded build. Just before this, I tried Poison Artillery Ballista, and it felt terrible. There was a huge ramp time, it was only good at single target, and it was just really awkward to play. Now, due to Spark's somewhat erratic travel pattern, I was kinda concerned the same would be the case here. It hasn't been. You fire so many projectiles that aiming really isn't a thing, and everything always gets hit. You deal great damage at close range, decent damage at long range, and incredible damage in tight spaces. Due to permanent flask uptime, the build feels pretty speedy, and kind of like you have a permanent mage blood. The layered defenses plus absurd recovery let you click all the sketchy altars and shrug damage off with ease. Personally, I always value quality of life in the builds I play, and this one's no exception there. I still haven't figured out how much DPS I do, but it's definitely enough that I haven't felt like my damage was lacking at any point. Now, my character is pretty darn min-maxed, but there's a few things you could do. If you really wanted to fight bosses, you could optimize for mitigation via Fourth Vow and Mahuxalotl's Machination, at the cost of going back to flask spamming. I could upgrade my weapon for a little bit more damage, swap out Diadem for a rare helmet for a little bit more of a well-rounded item, clean up my cluster jewels for a couple more relevant suffixes, maybe replace a ring with Death Rush for adrenaline and a little faster mapping, add Blood Rage for frenzies, though that comes with the downsides of clicking altars and getting, well, negatives from having frenzies, working in endurance charges, which is great for bosses, but again comes with the downside of clicking altars and getting negatives for endurance charges. However, at this point, I don't think there's anything I could change which would make a super meaningful difference. The build already feels great and tackles all content, so further min-max would be purely cosmetic. But what about you? What builds have you played which had an extremely high quality of life, and as a result felt really fun? And do you think that you'll be giving Poison Spark a try? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this possible. And your support is especially helpful in facilitating the creation of longer guide videos such as this one, which take a lot of extra time and are usually a lot more finicky than, hey guys, I tried delving and it was fun. Speaking of, if you want something else to watch, maybe check out my recent thoughts on Delve, my Righteous Fire crafting video, or general crafting livestream. Links to all of those will be up in the card and down in the description, or you can always go for a recommendation that's on screen right now. With that said, thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.